Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and it's time for some more orc painting videos. This one is all about the Deathskulls, one of my favourite factions. They were on the front cover of the first book I ever had for the hobby, which was Ere We Go, this amazing orc book, and always had a soft spot for these guys, mainly because they're absolute rotters, like a proper thieving gitz. They nick stuff, off other orcs. They'll do something different to it and sell it back to them. They've got loads of superstitions, so they've always got lots of trinkets and things on them. They think blue is a lucky colour, so they paint stuff blue, all those sorts of things. And they embodied that element of the sort of orc humour that I really enjoy. But also, I think they look awesome. You've already got your brilliant orc models, and now you can slap a load of blue paint on them and stuff, which I think on the tabletop, blue is one of my favourite colours for armies. It's just, I think, really impactful and really effective as a tabletop scheme. So in this video, I'm going back to basics and I'm going to do a step-by-step of how I would go about painting up Deathskulls if I was doing an army of them. So let's paint. So a few weeks ago, I did a video about what would I do if I was going to get into collecting and painting orcs, and I covered basically my sort of processes for developing schemes and why I was doing what I was doing. And I haven't been able to sort of stop thinking about it really. I had tons of fun doing that video, and then I thought, oh, sod it, I'm just going to do a video for all of the Ork clans because I like doing them. So some of the videos will have a similar recipe to what I did in that previous Ork video like this one, but I'll be chucking in loads of different Ork skin recipes because fundamentally I think different skin tones across an orc army looks really cool, and it's just fun. I've also got like a bin bag's worth of green paint, so I might as well use it, and what better to use it on than the orcs. For me, really, you just want 3 different greens, a mid, a base, and a highlight, preferably with a fairly big step between them. And I actually quite like that sort of tonal shift where you have maybe a slightly greenier, more yellow-green maybe for a highlight, and then a more blue-green for a shadow, and vice versa, and just play around with it and have some fun. So for this one, I'm going to use a couple of the Minicolour greens. This is starting off with Leaf, which is just kind of sort of nice, sort of slightly yellowy mid-green colour. Partly because of the weather at the moment, which is very warm in the UK, but also because of essentially trying to change a little bit of how I'm painting. I'm going to be working with much more dilute mixes than I often have. So I'm not worrying about trying to get a nice smooth base coat in one go. In fact, I'm not particularly worrying about trying to get a nice even base coat at any stage of this paint job. I don't want it physically lumpy and bumpy, but I'm not worried about there being slight differences in opacity and all the rest of it between layers. I think it will be more interesting to look at. So a couple of thin down layers of that leaf green, and now I'm going to go in with my shade colour. So I've chosen bottle here, bottle green, and I'm going to make a wash out of it. So to do this, I'm going to use a medium, an acrylic medium. In this case, I'm using Lamium medium, but you could go just get a big bottle of matte medium or something from the art store. It would do exactly the same thing. And I'm going to mix that with some water and the paint. Now, the reason I'm using a little bit of medium in this mix is so that the paint doesn't split out completely. We want those pigments to be able to float around nicely, even though we're thinning it right down. And once we got it down to a classic sort of wash consistency, I'm going to wash it all over the model. I've got a nice big brush here. I'm going to work my way across sections of the miniature, and I'm going to try and finish my brush stroke with the bristles in a recess. So that's where the paint generally will pool rather than on the surface and start creating those nasty little tide marks and things that we don't really like. One of the things I would recommend, other than using the big brush when you're doing these washes, is because we are using really dilute mixes of paint, the brush is already wet before we're using it as well, it does suck that paint really quite far up into the bristles. So you need to be pretty good at washing your brush thoroughly between colours and then also at the end of the session, because you don't want that paint getting sucked all the way up to near where the metal bit is, the ferrule is, and causing you issues later down the line. So once that was dry, I go back to the initial green and I start to do just layer upon layer of highlights. I start adding in a little bit of gherkin, which is the highlight colour to it as well, which is that really yellow green. Something like Elysian green by GW would be a very similar green to that for the highlight. And again, keeping the paint probably just above a wash consistency, so not too much on my brush. So I touch my brush off on a piece of kitchen paper or something before hitting the model. But because I've used a big brush here, I was in fact able to go the entire way around the model here without returning to the palette. which was wonderful. And whilst some of these processes, particularly the skin, you may think, well, this isn't terribly efficient and it's going to be very time consuming and all the rest of it. I would disagree in that perhaps it isn't the most efficient, but I don't really care about that. From a time consuming point of view, I think the skin on the whole model took, with filming, maybe 10 to 15 minutes to do. But I think actual painting time on one orc, the skin is probably around about 10 minutes, which in my opinion is not too long whatsoever, because every single stroke I'm doing is not making a huge amount of difference to what's underneath it. So it's quite difficult for me to make a mistake, which makes the whole process for me really relaxing and really enjoyable. All I'm thinking about doing with each of these muscles is drawing the highlight towards sort of the highest point of the muscle and towards where the light is coming from. Now, sometimes that might mean actually going into a recess, like on one of his biceps or something. So even though the peak of the muscle, the belly, might be facing downwards, we wouldn't highlight up to that. We would highlight up to where the little crease was facing the light upwards. But generally, I'm highlighting towards the sort of peak of each muscle. So I'm giving consideration to light source and all the rest of it, but I'm not getting too bogged down in it. I just want it to look cool. But I'm not just leaving every recess dark and painting all the edges light, is I guess the point I'm trying to get to. But hopefully you can see as I'm working on the model, you can see the dilution of the paint. It's very, very dilute. And you can see that I'm just slowly building it up layer by layer, not worrying about being perfect with it. So we end up creating, in my opinion, all this nice, interesting kind of texture and variety across the model. And I find it not only fun to do, I find it really pleasing to look at. And I said a few weeks ago I wanted to try and develop my painting, and I think this is one way that I can be doing it, is painting more larger volumes of organic shapes, and in this case literally sort of flesh. I think it will improve my painting. I think I've done a lot of armour painting over the years. I think it's time to do more with cloths, materials, skin, that sort of thing. And this is the style in which I'm trying to paint. And I don't think this style is necessarily at odds with painting an army. I'm certainly painting this model with a view to, could I paint, a mob of Deathskull boys like this without it taking forever, without me losing enthusiasm. So the last bit I'm going to do for the skin for now is a final little highlight just on the face and the hands. I think that's enough for a gaming miniature. You could always take it further on a character model. You could take it further on any model you want. I'm just showing you the colours I've used and trying to explain to you the reasons that I'm using them. So I've taken my highlight colour, which is that gherkin, and then I'm mixing in an ice yellow, a lemony yellow colour here. This is Minicolour yellow. The reason I've chosen that is because it's already quite a yellow green and I wanted to keep that. So by using the sort of lemony yellow colour to highlight it with, we retain that that property of the colour. Then here I'm just going in and doing, as I say, areas of the face and then the little areas of the knuckle. And you may have noticed that as I've been going around the model painting it, I'm always drawing my brush to where I want to leave the paint. So if I want to highlight the certain area like the knuckles, I'm starting away from the knuckle and I'm painting down towards it, which means that I'm going to keep depositing paint on that highest area, or the point that I want to make more solid in that colour. And over time, because we've probably got 10-15 layers of paint on it, it starts to build up and you get a lovely natural kind of transition going on there. And everything I've done so far I've done with a brush. You can do this next stage with a brush if you want to. I love the airbrush. We have a Cult of Paint series of signature series of airbrushes with Harder and Steenbeck. I love using it. And I think for large areas of the miniature, the airbrush can be a really useful tool. So here I'm loading up a colour called Reddish Flesh by AK. This is Quickgen. Mixing it with a little bit of airbrush thinner. I'm just going to spray the model from beneath. Now, just wanted to say a huge thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. If you'd like more in-depth videos and stuff from, say, a lot from Andy, where he might do 3, 4, 5-part videos on display projects, focusing maybe just on one element like NMM or skin, or his whole Golden Demon projects from the modelling right the way through to his final thoughts after the competition, as well as tutorials from me and from Ben as well, then consider supporting us over on Patreon. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be able to do anything that we're doing. So huge thank you. And if you can't support us on Patreon, then liking, subscribing, commenting on the video, it all makes a huge difference as well. So thank you for that too. So you can see here, I'm holding the miniature away from me and I'm just spraying and building up probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 layers or something like that of the paint, letting it dry in between. And you can see, I think it adds quite a lot of drama to the model now. We know that we can shade red with green and so on, and green with red. And I just love that reddish flesh paint. Now, as I mentioned, it's been very hot and I have not been thinking straight. So I'd been painting this guy up and was thinking, right, we're going to come to the armour now. And I realised he's got no armour on him because, of course, I was going to use this guy as the Deathskull model. I've got all the orcs in front of me for the different clans I'm going to do. This guy was actually going to be a blood axe. So I went ahead and repainted him. Not repainted him, rather. I went ahead and figured, how can I make this guy into a Deathskull? So I looked at the brilliant colour panels of the Deathskulls here from one of the Forge World books. And he'd got a marine shoulder pad on, and I thought, oh, do you know what? I can do that. So grabbed a quick Mark 6, Heresy Mark 6 pad, and just, you know, mashed it up a bit so it looked kind of orky and bolted onto him. That was the first mistake, thinking that, oh, I've used the wrong orc here. Well, I suppose that was a mistake. The second mistake, looking back on it now, is that I hadn't really done anything to the orc other than painted the skin. So why I didn't just pick up the other orc that was intended to be the Deathskull and continue to paint him, other than having a slightly different skin recipe, I'm not quite sure. So hopefully, you know, we don't come across that too much in the other clan videos that we're going to do for the orcs, but who knows? I think it turned out pretty cool anyway, and it was a nice opportunity to do a little quick kit bash. I wasn't intending to do any kit bashes at all for these. These were just meant to be straight painting recipe type videos. But it's always a joy, you know, carving into a model that you've painted, covering it in glue and all the rest of it. Now, we can always use plastic glue over paint, so plastic will just melt straight through your paint, so you don't need to worry about like scraping it away like you would with, say, super glue or anything like that. Plastic, I say, it'll just melt through and bond the surfaces however you need them. So I just use a little bit of the thicker stuff to secure it, and then I cleaned it up with a little bit of extra thin, just to make sure there weren't any knobbly bobbly bits. And then what I didn't show here, because I didn't film it very well, I just carved out a little bolt to shove through out of a bit of sprue to shove through the top of it to look like he bolted it onto his arm or something like that. This is the second video I've been recording with the new filming setup, and I think it's a lot better than the previous one, so thank you for bearing with me on it. Certainly towards the end of the video, I really start to dial it in. Very much looking forward to future videos. I think we're going to get some really nice footage, which is a huge plus. Right, now, onto his trousers. I blacked out all the areas on the model that I thought were going to be darker colours, just to give me kind of an idea of what colours to put where. And I had a look at the art panels. For me, if you're ever in doubt, just go and have a look at what your sort of classic artists have done. You know, the GW illustrators do amazing pieces. They can usually tell you exactly what you need to put where. So for this, I was like, right, well, let's keep it fairly boring for his clothes, because we're going to do a nice sort of bright blue here and there on him. So I thought brown trousers, classic place to start. I think that's what the box art does as well. You know, sometimes there's no need to be clever. I've gone here for a slightly sort of orangey brown, slightly orange brown. You could use something like Thondia, probably. It's somewhere between probably Thondia and Mornfang Brown, maybe from GW. This is a Minicolour paint, and I'm just, much like the skin, using a dilute mix and building it up on the model. There's not really anything more to say. I hope I don't come unstuck with this, painting things in this way. I hope it's still useful and I'm able to express and explain sort of what I'm doing in a useful way. But I'm fairly sure with these recipe videos, a lot of it is just the recipes and the sort of the order and the manner in which we do them. But here you can see I'm very, very deliberately not stippling, but doing loads and loads of sort of scratches and dashes to make it look like a rough material. Not necessarily leather, although probably leather, but maybe more like that sort of classic. Is it like mule skin or something like that? That rougher, almost sort of suede-y looking leather. And then once that was done, I mixed a little bit of black into the darker brown and just go in and redefine some of those shadows that we might have lost by being a bit slapdash. But I'm loving being slapdash with it. It's really relaxing, and again, in this heat where I can barely think, it's a very nice way to paint, you know, because you're just not stressing about any of it. And I think that's unbeknownst to me, certainly not deliberately, become a bit of a goal with my hobby at the moment, is to try and remove as much stress from the painting as possible. But I think they look really cool. And then looking at him like this, I was like, oh, I've got to do his vest basically just like a dirty off-white colour, which it sort of already is, right? So I've chosen here like an olivey brown colour, almost like a khaki. I think this is olive actually by Minicolour, but you can see it's that sort of khaki colour, khaki drab colour. And painted in a similar style to the trousers, but this time I tried to keep the direction of the dashes more or less all going in the same direction rather than lots of sort of crisscrosses and scratches, just again to try and suggest a slightly different weave, a slightly different material for this. And again, I'm just highlighting really the areas that will be most pronounced towards the light and facing upwards. I'm not worrying about sort of painting large areas and only leaving recesses dark and light on the edges, sort of that type of thing. Certainly painting this way is a lot of fun, and as I develop it, hopefully I'll be able to articulate why and ways in which we can take it further. But as I discover that, I will share that with you. I think we're about halfway through the video. I'm absolutely dripping. Because I can't have any fans on or anything for recording, so goodness knows what I'm going to talk about. But we can get through this. If you're still with me, come on, we can do it. Right, onto the leather. There's quite a few leather elements on the model, which is awesome, so because that gives me an opportunity to put some different colours on the Mini, and I love painting leather. I suppose in a way I've been painting leather in the style I've painted a lot of the rest of this model for years. I'm just sort of developing that manner of painting further to painting other surfaces, which is cool. But I thought, let's do some sort of blue leather for his bracers. Are they bracers? His wrist thingies. Let's do some nice sort of reddy brown leather for the gun strap, and then we'll do a black leather for the rest of him. So for the gun strap, I'm using a trio of Minicolour paints here, chocolate, mahogany, and russet. You could use something like a Rhinox hide, a Mormfang brown. That will give you a similar, maybe Steel Legion or something at the end. That'll give you a not dissimilar sort of triad. But I'm using the Minicolour paints because they're our paints and I love them. And this is my favourite sort of reddy brown leather recipe. A really, really thinned out paint because, again, I want the black to show through on this first coat because, again, it will give us some, I think, really interesting texture and depth to the paint, and we want that leather to be all nice and gnarly. I'm so impressed with these new Ork miniatures. I love them. As you can see, I've picked up that box of, is it the introductory box? Whatever the one is for the 40k where you get the different sculpts for the Orks and the different sculpts from the Marines. I picked that up the other day because I want them all, basically. I want to have that variety. Not necessarily for an army, but just to make some interesting videos, to have that choice there. But also, you know, should I want to do a Gorka Morka mob for October? Then I'm not going to be wanting for minis to use from that. So used mahogany there, that lovely sort of rich red brown. And then I moved into russet here, much more orangey, lighter brown. And I'm just going to do the edges and then loads of little dashes along the edge here to suggest that texture. And I guess that's what this whole style is, right? It's just sort of suggesting texture and suggesting what bits of the model are. I'm not trying to fully define and fully render anything. It's just, I loathe to say the word, but it's kind of vibes, right? I really dislike that term, but I think it is fairly accurate for this. Is when you look at the model, do you get my interpretation of an Ork? And I do, you know, spoilers, like I got it with the knobs the other week. It's my sort of vision of the grimdark style. It's not, you know, super murky. It's not just dunk it in streaking grime. You know, it's a different, and then there are so many different takes on grimdark, and I think it's brilliant to see them. And this is my interpretation, I guess, of that grimdark thing. Is it's not realistic. It's not meant to be realistic. It's not terribly natural. It's just hopefully evokes that kind of vibe. And I hope that's not too artsy-fartsy or whatever, but that's, you know, that's my intentions with it. So I might as well be honest with you. And you can tell me how you think that comes across, because fundamentally you guys are why I'm, you know, painting and showing these things, to try and give you some ideas for what you can do. Now, I did the black leather just by using Rakarth flesh in the black. I didn't really like it. I looked at it the next day. I wasn't that keen on it. So I just gave it a little glaze of this grey shadow, whatever it's called. It's basically slightly purple, and I thought that just gave it a slightly nicer tone to the black. So I went in with that, and that did the job. And then I thought, great, here's an opportunity to put a different blue on the model other than what I'll use on the armour. I can do his leather bracer things. And I think I mentioned at the top anyway, that I think blue is a brilliant colour for armies. It's not my favourite colour by a long way. I actually like blue things, if that makes sense. But I've had a lot of blue armies over the years because I think they look great on the table. But blue paint is so strong, it covers so well, that I followed the same routine for the leather, and I'd added just a little bit of like a sky blue colour into that darker blue, and straight away it just obliterated. I was like, oh my goodness, that's far too much. So then I just started to glaze the darker colour in over it. So by glaze, I mean thinned it way, way down with water, just did a little coat over the top, and you can see it just knocks back those scratchy highlights. So I continued doing that process, so we were able to get areas of light and dark on the model, showing all those scratches like you get on worn leather, but it didn't look too stark. The jump between the blues didn't look too weird. And that was all achieved by just glazing that darker blue over each time I did a highlight on it. And I actually think it came out really, really nicely. I like the idea that maybe it's, this is some squig leather or something that he's using to get the blue or whatever. But the new Ork minis have just got, in my opinion, just the right amount of detail. They're enjoyable to paint, but they don't take forever. Everything's pretty well defined, although I must say the ones out the introductory set, the kits were a touch more soft in areas, but super, super cool. For the blue armour, I wanted some classic kind of, I guess, ultramarine-y blues here. So again, I'm using Minicolour, Sodalite and Cobalt, but anything like your Macrags and your Hoas and your Teclises and your Signar blues and stuff from P3, anything like that, just nice bright comic book blue, mixed in a bit of black to make a murky base coat. And then I've chosen a really sort of old brush that's all split out, you can see here, and then I just start doing tons and tons of scratches and dashes again to try and build up hopefully what is a different looking texture and like a nice gnarly sort of beaten up armor look. And I think it achieved it fairly well. And the model itself, the shoulder pad, has no physical texture on it. When you run your finger over it, there's no sort of bumpy stuff, there's all these different sort of dashes on there, which together end up creating this illusion of loads of dents and things on it, which I really like. And it's ever so quick to do. So I think you absolutely can army paint like this, or I would. And by that, I talk about that much more in the other Ork videos. So if a little bit of talking around the subject and the theory behind it interests you, I'll link up and you can go and check that one out. Now, I decided to pop a couple of decals on. It was the end of the day, so I thought, I'll pop some decals on and start the base, leave it overnight, because we do get a new decal sprue in the Armageddon box, so it'd be a shame not to use it. Now, all the Ork clans have gone through slight tweaks and changes, much like, your Craft Worlds have and your Chaps of Sea Marines and stuff have over the years, but there's certain elements of the Deathskulls that have remained, and like some of the symbols, like this one, on the shoulder pad here, they've been around for so long, so it's just a shame not to use them. Once it was on there, I went back in with the darker blue and did some scratches over it just to help sort of chip it up and weather it into the paint job, as it were, so it doesn't look quite so much like a sticker that I popped on. And then I went back in with a little bit more white added into the lighter blue and just a few more scratches around the area where I thought the light was going to sort of bounce off, and also where I wanted to draw people's attention to. There's lots of little, you see, dashes and this, that, here and everywhere. Just not getting bogged down. Again, vital, because the paint was being a complete pig to try and work with anyway. So if I had got bogged down in it and upset, there wasn't anything I could do about it. So might as well crack on. Which brings us on to the face and, of course, the eyes. So obviously with the heat and using not only a new camera, but also trying a different angle with the camera here, which I actually really like, painting small white dots on his eyes felt like the natural thing to do. Some of it I even got in focus. I wanted to put a dot of white in there first so that when I put the red over the top, it was nice and bright and still showed. Whereas if we'd just gone straight over it, it would instantly have made that red a bit murkier. Like I was saying earlier about blue being so strong and covering so well, red's kind of the opposite. Red really benefits from that help of having a bit of white underneath it. So that's what we went in and did. This right here, this footage excites me. This is what I need to be aiming for to get for you guys every single shot, every single video, and it's what I will be doing. And I'm tweaking the setup. I'm using various pads and marks and all the rest of it. But, you know, felt like a change after 6 years or whatever of making videos. So there'll probably be a few ropey ones in this transitional phase. Now really it's time to do finishing touches on the skin and the face. So I've gone back in with the reddish flesh wash here. I'm just defining the recesses around it. And then I want to do the tusks or the teeth. I liked them to be a slightly more yellow bone colour. I did it on a skull a little while ago and I really liked it. So all I've done here is taken 3, so taken a darker brown, then that yellowy sort of, I think it's Zandri Dust I've used here, like a yellowy bone colour in the middle, and then like an ivory colour for the highlight, and just simply kept them thin, worked dark to light, pulling the paint up towards where the highlight is, and it created certainly sufficiently decent enough looking transitions for me not to worry about going back in and fiddling around with it too much, which again for army painting, it's what we want, right? Nice and simple. And then the final stage was to go back to our highlight green, and I've mixed in even more of that icy yellow colour, so Minicolour yellow here, lemon rather. And I'm just doing loads of little dots along, or dashes rather, along his lip. I'm going to highlight his nose up, and then I'm going to highlight the upper lip as well. We don't really have an upper lip there, but sort of that kind of upper lip area on them, because I want to do that slightly pinky purple look. I don't love it all over the orc, but I think particularly on this more yellowy green skin, I think it works really nicely. I'm quite tempted. I've got halfway through a more blue-green scheme on the next orc, and I think I might choose to do like more like blue-green lips on him on that one and see how it looks. But again, I just glazed over a bit of Magos Purple. Did the job, no problem at all. Now I wanted to do a bit of war paint. I mentioned earlier the Deathskulls, very, very superstitious. They used to cover themselves in symbols and stuff with all this war paint. And I was a little bit nervous. I didn't want to do it blue on this guy because I felt there was enough blue on him already. But I did want to put them on there, so I thought, well, I'll do it in white. Now, white is notoriously, in my opinion, tricky to work with anyway. And again, in this heat, it wasn't behaving particularly nicely. So to give myself a hand, I gave the model just a couple of thin coats through the airbrush of gloss varnish. And this was because if I made a mistake, as long as I acted fairly quickly and I was gentle with the model, I'd be able to remove the mistake that I had made. Now, I did let this gloss varnish dry for a good sort of hour before I went and did it before lunch and came back. It won't be fully cured, but it's certainly dry enough for what we need to do with it. And then the very first thing I did was make a mistake, which was really useful. So here I just take a wet cotton bud very, very gently, because if you push too hard, you'll just go through all that paint anyway. But it just gave you enough sort of wiggle room to remove the paint over the top. And you can see here the white is more or less just drying straight on the tip of the brush before we get to the Mini. But in the end, I was able to do a couple of nice kind of symbols over him, and I really liked them. And I deliberately was using a very thin mix, so I got quite streaky marks on the model because I felt that would end up looking more like war paint. Whereas if I was doing tattoos, I probably stippled it, to be honest, but if I was doing tattoos, I'd have made sure it was a much more solid looking line of colour on there. But I quite liked that slightly sketchy, painted on look, because after all, that's what it was going to be. And then there was this little area on the sort of axe head thing on his shooter that I was like, I can put a couple of blue checks on there. That'd be fun to do. So I just grabbed whatever blues had not completely dried up on the palette and did some simple checks with that. We'll cover checks loads, probably in the Goth video, but maybe in one of the others, maybe in the Bad Moon video, we'll see. Once all that was done, I gave the model a couple of coats of matte varnish. Now, this was to obviously take away the gloss that was on there anyway, but also we've used different paints with different properties. We've been diluting paints, which can change their properties. So I wanted a nice unified finish across the model before I did the metals. And for that, I chose to use an AK matte varnish. Now onto the metals. So you may have noticed this earlier in the video. I actually painted this stage with Jasper do something like Doomball Brown by GW, nice sort of super orangey brown here all over the shooter. That was simply because I was waiting for something to dry, so I thought I'd just slap a bit of paint on there while I was waiting. I think, what was I waiting for here? Probably the gloss varnish to cure or something like that. But I wanted to do a slightly different approach to metals. One of my goals with this Ork series is just have a play around with a few different recipes, partly because I think it's fun to show them, but also I'm intrigued and I want to discover a few more and learn a bit more about that. So I thought I will almost wash this orangey reddy brown over the black. I think it looks really nice already just with that, which again sort of triggered something in my mind. I was like, oh, maybe I can play around with that more in the future. But it's just a fun thing to do, really. And as I'm continuing to waffle along, I realise I haven't edited this clip, which is why you're watching me for like a minute just paint a bit of orange brown on the shooter. But it looks really cool. I really wanted this guy to be a blood axe because I was like, he's kind of got a Rambo vibe to him. But never mind. I guess I'll just have to get another one. Then I gave it a wash with Nuln Oil. This was simply because when I had applied the black earlier, I clearly hadn't done a very good job, and there was areas on there that was still the grey sort of primer. As it turns out, I think the Nuln Oil wash was actually very effective and a nice, again, added an additional layer of interest to this metal, which again has taken very little thought, very little stress to do. Now I wanted to use a few oil paints. So those of you that haven't used them before and you're a bit nervous, I'd really encourage you to give them a go. I've got lots of videos all about oils here on the channel, and if you're going to jump in, I always suggest people pick up like a burnt sienna colour and then a dark brown colour, which is what we're using here, because you can use them for rust and dirt on most projects. It's not really sort of faction dependent or anything like that. You also might find useful one of these little metal mixing dishes. I'm using here low odour white spirit. We call it mineral spirits. You might call them in America. We call them white spirits here in the UK. It evaporates nice and fast. It's cheap to buy. It's not too bad on the smell. And we use this to thin our oils with rather than water. You can get water-based oil paints, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but they I think Winsor & Newton do one, the Griffin Alclids or something. So you would use water rather than white spirits. So if that's something that concerns you about using oils, consider going and checking those out. Maybe I'll talk about them in another video. But we thin it down into a wash consistency. It's roughly going to be 50-50 paint to thinner. And then we just check it, or I check it on a piece of sprue or whatever I've got close to hand, in this case a tiny little siphon, and just see, lovely. So it's not staining the surfaces too much, but in the recesses it's settling nicely. So we give that just a couple of coats over the metal here. It seems strange calling it metal when there's nothing metallic on it, but that's just a thing I need to get out of the habit of, I guess. And I love using oil paints like this. You could just use acrylic washes instead. And again, I've done a video dedicated to using just acrylics to get very similar effects to oils. But I like using oils. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the slightly different finish it gives us, which is why I've chosen to do them. Then for all the bullets that he's got all over them, just wanted to keep it super simple, kind of brassy colour. So I used Runelord Brass by Games Workshop. Then I did a roughly 50-50 mix, maybe slightly more Agrax than Poxwalker here, and did a real hefty, thick wash of that over the top. Did the job, I think. And for me, that's one of the things with army painting is, for myself, I prefer to have one or two areas on the model that I've really put quite a lot of time and effort into. So I guess on this guy, it would be probably the skin and the armour. And then I'm happier to make other areas more simple, like say the metals. You know, metal and an acrylic wash looks really good. Metal and a oil wash looks really good. I'm just using the neat undiluted oil here to do a couple of little rusty streaks. Felt silly not to, underneath that bolt right above a white decal, seems silly not to pull a little rusty streak down there. And again, I've done videos dedicated to working with oils and making rust streaks and stuff like that, so I will link those as well. And then I wanted to do a little bit of dirt and grime on his vest. Normally I would have thinned this down and flicked it on with a brush, but as I say, with the heat and the paint and everything behaving how it's behaving, I wasn't super confident of that, so I just applied it with a point. Anyway, I think it worked absolutely fine. And then I'm just pressing the brush, which is loaded up with thinner, just on top of those dots and letting that thinner dissipate out, and we'll end up with these nice sort of dirty marks on his vest. Then I go back in, just a slight re-highlight on some of the metals, bring some of the shine back that those washes have killed off. And for the shooter itself, just use like a nice dark silver colour and kind of dry brushed, kind of wet brushed it over on this. And I think it was, yeah, I think it was absolutely fine for selling the look of them, the shooter that we were going for here. A scavenged bit of post-battlefield gear that he's nicked off someone and repurposed for himself. And a little bit of scorch at the end, so we're just spraying a bit of black, very thin down black paint on the tip of the gun there. And the base, if you want to check out the Salamander's Captain I did a few weeks ago, that's got the full process of how I do these kind of orangey bases in. And that's him done. My take on a Deathskulls Ork. I love him. I love Orks. I'm really not sure if I ever want to paint anything that isn't an Ork ever again, but the channel might get a little bit boring if we do that. But yeah, let me know what you think of him. I think it's got what I mentioned earlier. It's got that kind of vibe that I think is my cup of tea when it comes to thinking about the Orks. I think if you look at him on the table, you can easily identify that's what he is. But the biggest thing for me was this removal of stress for painting. It's processes, it's techniques, it's products that I'm very familiar with, but it's just trying to use them in slightly different ways, thinking about them slightly differently, and taking advantages of what those changes can give us. And hopefully we can apply that across the rest of the clans over the next couple of weeks. The intentions is for me to probably drop, 5 or 6 videos over the next, say, 2 or 3 weeks with the Ork Clans. We know that the Ork Codex is not far away. That was sort of a big driving factor for me, was like, oh, I'm ever going to do them now, feels like a good time to do them, but they keep talking about it on Orcom, so I reckon it's ready. So let me know down in the comments, what's your favourite Ork Clan? What's your favourite bit of lore as well? I would love to start sticking a little bit more lore in these videos, but I don't really know if there's an appetite for that with you guys or not, and whether that muddies the channel up a bit too much. There's already a few really good lore channels out there anyways, and they're on YouTube. But yeah, who's your favourites? Who are you looking forward to seeing next? Who do you want me to cover? Spoiler, I'm going to do all of them. Maybe not freebooters. We might get to freebooters at a later date. I've got more of a kit bash idea for those guys. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the recipes. So I haven't done one of these more classic recipe videos for a little while now, so I'm a little bit out of practice with them, but we will get more succinct. We will get more concise with them. And hopefully they'll end up being a useful repository for you guys when you want to try out a bit of hobby in the future. So as ever, if you've got any questions about anything I've done in the video, pop them down in the comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you like any of the models that you've seen in this video, but you don't have the time or the wherewithal to do them yourselves, then consider giving Ben an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com. Maybe he can help you out.